Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we sow some marigold seeds. So let's go. Before we get to sowing the seeds, I want to give you a profile of the marigold plant because there's so much fun information to know about marigolds. While I was doing my research on this plant, I didn't realize how much information there is to know about marigolds. I always just knew that it's a pretty plant. It's very popular. You see it in all the nurseries and garden centers. A lot of people have it in their landscape. And I know it's a flower that my dad really loved to have in our yard growing up as a kid. And one thing that I've learned over the last many years is that it's great to have, especially next to tomato plants. And that's pretty much all I knew when it came to marigolds. But when I was actually looking it up and researching it for today's video, I was shocked at the amount of information that is good to know and good to share with all of you. So let's first start with the fact that it's pretty much an annual in most growing zones. In some growing zones, it can be a perennial, and in some growing zones, when it drops its seeds, it can come back year after year, which means that it can self-seed or self-sow itself. Here where I live in New Hampshire, Zone 5B, we typically don't have the marigolds coming back each year. On a very, very rare occasion, I've had one or two marigold plants come back from seed, but it is very rare. So here where I live, it's really treated as an annual. And I've always known that you can find marigolds in different colors, different variations. It can be a solid color, it can be multicolor. And I've also seen marigolds where there are nice, short, petite ones. Typically, you would find those in a container garden or a pot or towards the front of a flower bed. And then there are very tall varieties out there that you can find towards the back of a flower bed. And also, those make great cut flowers if you want to do a cut flower arrangement. Generally speaking, marigold thrive in full sun conditions. So make sure you're giving your marigolds what they need if you want them to bloom profusely for you. One thing that I really love about this plant is that it looks great when you plant it in the spring, especially during the heat of the summer, and it looks even beautiful in the fall time. Who doesn't love those nice, vibrant orange, yellow colors as fall is approaching? It's just such a nice color to have all year long in your garden. And I mentioned earlier that it's a great plant to put next to tomatoes. So I want to share a little bit more on what I was able to research. So it's a companion plant that you would plant near your vegetable crops. And the reason is it prevents pest and disease problems. Now here's the full list of vegetables that benefit if you plant marigolds next to them. Cucumbers, melon, eggplants, squash, potatoes, lettuce, pumpkins, tomatoes, asparagus, beans, and onions. I didn't know that. I'm not sure if you knew that. So it really is great to have plenty of marigold plants sprinkled all throughout your vegetable garden. It's really going to help with all those plants, which really surprised me. Now, I'm always trying to look for information from reputable sources. The Cornell Cooperative Extension, which is definitely reputable, says that marigolds just might keep a number of pests in check. Some of those pests include aphids, cabbage maggots, potato beetles, corn earworms, cucumber beetles, flea beetles, Japanese beetles, nematodes, as well as squash bugs. That's a large list of pests that we could find in our gardens. So there are just so many great benefits to marigold plants. I think it's a must-have if you're going to have vegetables in your yard. And like many plants out there, marigolds will attract bees, pollinators, and butterflies. Some people don't like to grow marigolds in their yard. They say they're stinky. They don't like the smell of them. Well, guess what? We might not like the smell of them, but so many other pests also don't like the smell of them. And that's the reason that you would want to have them in your yard. So if you can put up with their stinkiness, it's well worth it in the long run. And it seems like deer as well as rabbit can't stand the smell of marigolds. Although I'm not sure if that's true because I haven't planted many marigolds in my yard. I've planted some, but not for the purpose of repelling certain pests like deer. Although I think deer are beautiful, I do have a lot of deer in my yard. So you can bet I'm going to be planting a ton of marigold this year in my yard, and I'm going to see how I do when it comes to overall general pests in the yard. And just like a few other flowers out there, the marigold is also an edible flower, which is nice to know if you want to garnish it on maybe a cake or cupcakes or something like that. I always appreciate a plant that's both drought as well as heat tolerant. The plants that require so much water are nice, they're beautiful, but knowing that these type of plants are drought tolerant is always good, because I do have irrigation set up in a lot of areas of my yard, but not every area of my yard. So I'm glad to know that marigolds can be drought tolerant. I remember as a kid, there were a few flowers that my dad would send me out to deadhead and just keep the plants trimmed up. Marigold were definitely one of them. And the reason is simple, because you want your flowers, you want your plants to look beautiful, and you want them to keep producing. And if you don't deadhead marigold plants, what happens is you're telling that plant to just go to seed, to form the seed heads, and it stops producing those beautiful flowers. And since you really want to have marigolds looking beautiful into the fall time, definitely keep up with deadheading your plants. But with that said, marigold seeds are very easy to collect. And you want to collect those seeds because you want to be able to have seeds for next year. So when it comes to deadheading, I say do a great job spring, summer into early fall, but leave a few of the blossoms behind and don't deadhead them. You want to have some seeds on hand that you can collect in the fall time. Okay, so I always like to think of a fun fact. And when it comes to marigolds specifically, I remember growing up, and we used to go to India every year with my parents, and I would see marigolds like at the temples, and even like at a wedding. If I went to a wedding, a lot of times you would see like the flowers coming down off of like some of the structures, and they were basically marigolds that were put together in garlands. And basically, I guess what I'm saying is I see marigolds quite a bit when I would visit India. And I wondered about that as I was doing my research on this flower. Like, why? Why is it so popular um, in India? And what I found was marigolds are very popular in Hindu weddings. They represent the sun, symbolizing brightness and positive energy. Now, keep in mind, when I was doing my research, I didn't go to a whole ton of websites. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And that also the flower is associated with many different gods and goddesses. I didn't want to go into too much detail with that, but I did see that oftentimes when we're talking about Hindu gods and goddesses, you'll find that there's different symbolisms associated with the marigold flower. So I thought that was really interesting. I love learning more about my culture and learning more about flowers as well. So I've had a lot of success growing marigold from seed, and it's been a few years since I have actually grown marigold plants from seed. It's definitely been at least 2 years. And what I realized was, the other day I was thinking about this. When we start growing flowers from seed, we count backwards, right? So we have flowers that we start from seed, let's say 14 weeks before our last frost or 12 weeks before our last frost. And I always, every year I get very busy with starting those plants from seed. And once I get to like the 8 week mark, all of a sudden it's like I run out of energy, I run out of time, I run out of space under my grow lights, you name it. And I don't want that to happen this year, especially when it comes to these marigolds, because I want to have plenty in my yard for the reasons I listed earlier, having to do with disease and pests and such. So I'm going to make it a point. That's one of my goals for this year, is to stay on top of my seed starting, especially starting those seeds that I really care about and I want to have in my yard and in my landscape. That's why we're doing the marigolds today. So you can start your seeds indoors or outdoors. They're actually very easy to start outdoors as well. I remember my mother-in-law used to just plant a whole entire row of marigolds out in her vegetable garden. And then as they would grow and they'd be a few inches tall, she would prick them out of her vegetable garden and then move them around her entire yard. It used to be so pretty in the fall time. She'd have marigolds lining the front of her flower beds. And I would love to do that. So for this year, my goal is to start a bunch of marigolds indoors under my grow lights, but then I'm also going to start some outdoors. I'm thinking up along my front walkway because I have irrigation set there and it gets a fair amount of sun. That would be a great place for me to start some marigold seeds. And then I can prick those out and move those around my yard, similar to how my mother-in-law used to do it. So that's my goal for the marigolds, is to start it in two different ways. And when it comes to starting your seeds indoors, you want to start them about 6 to 8 weeks before your average last frost date. Today is March 29th. My average last frost date is May 15th. So that's about 7 or 8 weeks from now. And it's a perfect time for me to be starting these seeds. In terms of the depth that you want to plant marigold seeds, it's about 1/4 inch deep. I did read in a few places to barely cover them. One place actually said that they need light to germinate. I've never heard that when it comes to marigold seeds. However, I think it's safe to say you want to plant them very shallow. You don't want them to be very deep. And if you want to be safe, you could surface sow them in like a container or into your 6 cell packs. And you could just put a light layer of vermiculite. But I don't plan on covering them with vermiculite. I will just barely cover them with my seed starting mix. And it looks like it takes about 1 to 2 weeks for these seeds to germinate, which is pretty quick. And for the optimal soil temperature, the seeds need about 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit for them to germinate. This is my first year using heat mats. In the past, I never had them. And I would germinate the seeds indoors, just inside my house, where the house temperature stays generally about between 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And I never had any trouble getting the seeds to germinate. So I would say you don't need to have a heat mat for these seeds to germinate. And I'm not planning to put my seeds that I'm going to be starting on any heat mats. One thing that I used to do a number of years ago that I really enjoyed doing, especially with my kids when they were younger, was I liked to start marigold seeds in a paper towel, and I would put the seeds between 2 layers of paper towel. I would wet the seeds, and then I would just put the paper towel in tin foil. But you don't have to use tin foil. It could be a Ziploc bag. And my mother-in-law, she would just put it between the paper towels, and she would just lay it on a plate. The key thing being taking the seeds and putting them between moist paper towel. And within, again, 1 to 2 weeks, you would see basically the tail forming and the seeds would be germinating. And I love doing that. I love doing that just because it was fun to show the kids that. I love doing it because once the seeds were germinating, I would take out only the seeds that are germinating and put those into 6 cell packs that were filled with potting soil. And it was just kind of a fun process. And I would only take the seeds out that were germinating. The ones that were not germinating would still stay in the paper towel. And the kids and I would check it almost every day. So that might be something fun for you to do, or for you to do with your children or grandchildren or stepchildren. I think it's even something fun to do if you have maybe an older parent living with you. It's just a fun activity that I wanted to throw out there. And when it comes to these bigger seeds, I think it's a lot of fun to do it that way. And for me at this point, both my kids are in college and time is of the essence. I will be multi-sowing these seeds heavily in restaurant to-go containers. And then I will prick out the seeds that way and pot them up into 6 cell packs. What I want to do next is just show you what I have here for seeds. I have quite a few. I pulled out all the seeds that I have for marigolds, and I basically sort all my seeds in basically a tote. I'll put a link to that video down in the description below that shows you my process for not only just organizing all my seeds in that tote, but also how I organize them in a spreadsheet. So this is the year that I will be planting a bunch of these seeds. I basically want to get rid of them because some of them are old and I don't want to carry them on for another year. This packet of seeds is from Burpee. It's called Jaguar and it's very pretty. So it's quite old though. It's from 2014. So I will definitely be sowing this whole packet of seeds. Another packet from Burpee and it's called Scarlet Scarlet. It's a nice pretty red color. Also from 2014. This is also from Burpee. It's an heirloom seed and it's called Sweet Marigold Licorice. That's from 2012. This one is from American Meadows and it's I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Tagetes or Tagetes. erecta, and it's crackerjack. And I forgot to mention this earlier. And again, I'm going to put the spelling up on the screen because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Tagates, maybe. Um, those are specifically based on my research. Those are the ones that attract a lot of those beneficial insects and bugs. Are that variety or that kind of marigold, the tagates. So when you're looking for marigolds, it's good to have different ones in your yard, but just know that specifically those are the ones that you want to have if you're trying to keep insects at bay. And actually, that was another thing I wanted to mention when it comes to keeping insects at bay. So marigolds can attract beneficial insects like the wasps and other beneficial insects like that that will kill these bad insects in from your yard. But also sometimes marigolds can be basically a trap, meaning that certain bad pests will come to the marigold and attack your marigold plant. And so, in a way that's sad because you might get a marigold plant that's being infested by, some sort of bug and it's killing your marigold plant. But in a way it's good because it's a trap and it's those bad bugs are not then infecting your good plants. So there are just so many benefits on marigolds. I'm just remembering all of them from the research I was doing. So it's just a great plant to have in your yard for many reasons. Okay, and then other than these packet of seeds that are old that I had bought, I also have a ton of other seeds here. This one here is just a huge bag. It's a mix of marigold seeds. And I had made a video a while ago showing you how to check the germination rate of seeds. And I can put a link to that video down in the description as well. So I had taken a bunch of seeds from here. I put them in a wet paper towel. I think I maybe took I don't know, I think it was 10 seeds. And I wanted to see what the germination average rate was of the seeds in this bag. And I can't remember what it was, but let's just say out of the 10 seeds, only 3 germinated. That gives me an average. That tells me about 30% of the seeds in here are most likely going to germinate. So that's a good way to tell what the germination rate is of a seed. And then I don't know the date of when all these seeds were collected. It's just a huge mix of seeds. And then I have a whole bunch of seeds here that were from 2023. I collected them last year, 2022, 2021, and 2020. And they all are labeled with not only just the year, but also like the color of the flower, and then even sometimes the height. There were some taller ones, there were some shorter ones. I will not be planting all of these this year, but I will definitely plant some of them. But for today's video, the plan is just to plant some of these that are in these seed packets. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get some of these sown. Yes, this is a plate, but under this plate is a pot, and in this pot is seed starting mix. I make my own seed starting mix because it's a lot cheaper. I do a lot of plants from seed, and so I like to just save money that way. You can definitely buy your own seed starting mix. And because these seeds are bigger in size, I would even suggest you could use potting mix. I wouldn't suggest potting mix, however, for very tiny small seeds, but for marigolds, I think potting mix is fine as well. And when it comes to making my own seed starting mix, it's basically 2 parts of peat moss to 1 part of vermiculite. And I add just the smallest amount of dolomite lime to it as well to help with the pH level of the peat moss. Some people prefer to use coco coir, and that's fine as well. And when I'm talking about parts, I'm basically talking about the container you're using to scoop your material. So I have a small bowl, so it would be basically 2 of those bowls of peat moss to 1 bowl of vermiculite. And this seed starting mix has been pre-moistened. And I like to use boiling hot water, and I mix it in here. And the reason I like the boiling hot water is because it kills off the possibility of any fungus gnats as well as fungus gnat eggs that might have been in the peat moss. And I mix all of that up. I cover it with the plate and I let it sit until the seed starting mix has cooled down. And it has cooled down at this point. You want to make sure that your seed starting mix is nice and wet, but not too wet. So when you squeeze it, you don't want water dripping out. But when you let go, you notice that it can hold its shape or hold its form. And that's the perfect amount of water that's been added to the seed starting mix. Sometimes you'll find pieces of wood or chunks of material like this. You want to make sure you take those out because those can get in the way of the seeds trying to germinate. Again, marigold seeds are bigger. I wouldn't be as concerned, but definitely when it comes to smaller seeds, you want to remove any big material like this. Here's an example of one of the restaurant to-go containers that I've collected. I got these actually from the 99 restaurant, but lots of restaurants have them. And actually, they come with a nice clear lid. I've thrown them away since because I've been using these for years, but those are nice to keep as well. And you'll see that I made holes in the bottom here. I can't stress this enough. It's better to have more holes than less in the bottom. You definitely want the holes there because that's how you're going to bottom water this type of tray here. I've used different things to make the holes in the bottom, but here's one type of tool you could use. You just want to be careful. You don't want to cut yourself. And you just want to press down and push and just make the hole in your container. I added extra holes in here because I realized that while I've been bottom watering seedlings, there haven't been enough holes. So it's better to have more than less. When it comes to bottom watering, I like to use any sort of shallow tray that doesn't have any holes in the bottom of it. And this is just a old cookie sheet that came with one of my older toaster ovens. And I like to just add water to the bottom of it. And I'm showing this for demonstration purposes. We don't need to do it necessarily today with our seed starting, but once the seeds germinate and we have little plants in here and we need to bottom water them, this is how I do it, is just by putting water in a tray like this, setting this type of container in there and letting it basically wick up the water from the bottom to water the seedlings that are in here. You don't ever want to water the seedlings from the top because it can cause a lot of issues and it can actually cause damping off and kill off your seedlings. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and add the seed starting mix to our container. When it comes to sowing your marigold seeds, you don't have to mass sow them or multi-sow them the way that I'm doing it. I like to do it this way for a number of reasons. One reason is my seeds typically can be old. And if they are old, then this is a great way to ensure that I'm only pricking out the plants that germinate. So if there are seeds that are not viable and they're not going to germinate, I'm not wasting my time. I'm not wasting space in a 6-cell pack. Another reason why I like to sow my seeds in a container like this is it just saves room under my grow lights. Right now, my grow lights have a lot of plants under them, and I don't want to just use up precious real estate. So I'd rather use smaller real estate like this container here and let the seeds germinate. And once the plants start coming up, I can prick them out and then I can move them up into a 6-cell pack like this one here. But you can absolutely, if you want to, you can just plant your seeds directly in a container like this. What I did was I pressed down, but I didn't press down too hard. You don't want to press down too hard because you don't want to compact the soil. Here are the marigold that we're going to start right now. So I'm just going to place a plant label as a divider in the center here. And the reason is we're going to be planting these seeds on one side of the container and then a different type of seed on this side of the container. And I'm not worried at all if the seeds are too close to each other. It's perfectly fine. And once the plants start popping up, we'll be thinning them out anyway and potting them up into 6-cell packs. You don't ever want to forget to label. So this is Crackerjack, Tagetes erecta. And on the other side, we're going to be planting these seeds. One of the reasons if I'm going to buy locally, that I enjoy buying specifically the burpee seeds, like these ones here, is because Ocean State Job Lot, they have really good prices on their seeds. And even at the beginning of the season, it's not like you have to wait until the end of the season to get the discounted price. It starts right when you go there in the springtime. At least that's the case here where I live. and you can get the seeds for, I want to say it's like 40% off the price that's shown on the seed packet, which I think is a great deal. Always looking for bargains, and that to me is a very good bargain. I think a lot of what they have there actually is a really good price. You can find a lot of great fertilizers, um, the window boxes or hanging baskets, lots of great gardening things at Ocean State Job Lot. And no, I'm not sponsored by them. I just like to go shopping there for good deals. We have the Scarlet Starlet. It's hard to read that, but that's what it says. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to cover this very lightly with some seed starting mix. And then you want to press down. You want to make sure that the seed has good contact with that seed starting mix. That's very important. And if a seed pops up, just push it in. Even though the seed starting mix has been pre-moistened, I am going to add a small amount of water to the top. And I have a handheld water pump sprayer. That's what I'm going to be using. The next thing you want to do with whatever container you're using is you want to keep that humidity in. You want to keep the moisture levels locked in here so that those seeds have the best chance of germinating. And what I like to use is clear plastic wrap. You want to use anything that's going to hold in the moisture but let light come in, and so it can be some sort of a humidity dome or anything like that. I like to reuse my plastic wrap, and I have a different plant name here, so I'm going to cross that out, and I'm just going to write down Marigold and today's date. I'm not writing the specific kind of marigold because we already labeled it inside, and I'll be sure to update my spreadsheet with what we started today because I want to know the exact date that these were started so I can reference that next year and make adjustments accordingly. I'm thrilled that we started the marigold seeds. I'm still going to be planting some more marigold seeds, but it's very repetitive, so I figured I can do those off camera. But I hope you found this video helpful, and I'd love to hear from you. Do you start your marigolds from seed? And if you do you start them indoors under grow lights, or do you direct sow them outside? Also, I'd love to know, do you have marigolds that come back year after year? And if so, what variety are they? Please drop it in the comments below. I love hearing from you. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.